فتية آمنوا بربهم وزدناهم هدى.
And yes, we do have questions. Some of the questions are still coming through in the chat. Whoever does have questions, please send them on the chat and make sure they are relevant to the topic. We'll take however many Allah Azza wa Jal allows us to. I will go in the order of the questions as they came. One of the first questions, in fact, the first two questions are for sisters. The question is, please expel the doubt. And what do you advise if their parents request from the female children to go to university and keep a degree for a just in case future scenario, but that sister would want to marry instead and start a family? That's the first question.
So this is one of the big challenges we have in the modern time. The parents and sisters and the daughters are not on the same page when it comes to their career or their future. And many times you find that the sisters, once they are more practicing, more firm on the deen, more responsible, they want to move into motherhood, which is the best thing that they could possibly do. But the parents would like them to have a career, right? Especially if they're coming from a situation where they're either they don't have many sons, or many of them actually parents want their child to provide for them when they get older. So there is a consideration there. So definitely I would say in these kind of scenarios, the answer is that there needs to be, number one, the conversation, discussion openly between them about expectations and also what the sister wants. The parents, many times, they're not aware of what is happening until a sister refuses to go to school or to do any of these things, and parents are kind of thrown off, often because they're not on the same understanding of why and when did you decide this, etc. Second problem also is that there's differences in understanding about who's going to provide for them as they get older. As we mentioned, the responsibility falls on the children, but some parents, they might not have enough money for themselves. Their children are their assets, and now they're finding out that one of their sisters, one of their daughters does not want to do this anymore. So it becomes a confusion, and they feel like, no, I need you to do this. Also peer pressure from their side, they see a lot of their youth, their relatives doing this. So I think it requires more of, I think, a counseling approach. A lot of parents, there needs to be like a discussion. If they're not understanding each other, they're not able to agree, they need to get an imam involved who talks to them about, okay, so kind of sister, for example, if they're worried about providing, can she take on a job while being a mother from working from home? Is that an option? Entrepreneurship or whatever it may be. Is it possible for them, for example, to say, okay, I can study in the meantime, if, for example, this is what they're worrying about, that they won't let you marry until you get a job. Okay, can I, for example, study online or take a particular certification online and then move to that direction? There needs to be compromise. What's happening, I think, oftentimes is everybody's on their opinion, which is like, again, both parties, and they're not going to budge from it. And I feel parents sometimes are not being understood, and as well as the children. So here I would definitely require, like I said, working together in conversation and counseling. And if they can't get agreed, because it's not an easy yes or no that disobey your parents, because they have a consideration who's going to provide for them. But also sister has a right too to say, like, I would like to do what I want to do and get married and have children and not to do this. And also what's happening is that the jobs that are expected from sisters, and we haven't spoken about it in great detail here, perhaps another seminar or webinar, inshallah, about women's work, their conditions, etc., because I think it requires a separate discussion. Sometimes the sister is being pushed by the family to take on positions or environments or careers which are not very Islamic or not good for the femininity, and that's where the pressure is also coming. They want to study something that it's not conducive to motherhood. So at the end of the day, I think from all of this, what I'm saying here is that there needs to be an advice on both parties, that they need to come together. They have to talk to each other. And if they can't get to an agreement, talk to someone of knowledge to sit with them, or right, and to have that agreement to find a middle ground. Because both considerations are there, but sometimes I feel, Allahu A'lam, that the parents are not aware of these changes, right, of sister's plans until very late. And sometimes the sister, once she has made the decision, they know the parents are not accepting it. And so now they're like, okay, if you don't listen to me, I don't want to talk to you anymore. And our sister is saying that I'm just going to do it anyways, because no one, it's not wajib to listen. And you see, and there's no win-win here. Both parties are going to be lost. And I also think that we need to talk about maybe another time, what are these alternatives if we're talking about compromise? What do they look like? And so today's discussion was general, and maybe inshallah next time we'll get into more of those in detail. and also to look at some examples, right, of some of the fatwa of the ulama, and also the past, right, as well. How did sisters, for example, do? Because we mentioned before in our feminism work that many Sahabiyat used to work, right, as businesswomen. So they were mothers, wives, and businesswomen. So we know that. So there can be a middle ground, but what is it? What else can we offer? So inshallah, this is general, my general advice on this, and I think it's very important to strike the middle ground. It's very, very difficult, right, just to give the one answer because I know how sensitive this discussion is, and it's not something easy. May Allah make it easy for everyone.
جزاكم الله خيرا. Second question, for sisters who do not work, do you recommend to have them build their career as well? No.
So that's a very good question as well. Sisters who don't work, should they be getting, anything of careers or the likes? At the end of the day, if we look at the Sahabiyat, we find that many of them, they were, as we say today, homemakers, right? Or mothers. Mother is most important, homemakers. And it's not wrong then for a sister to think about doing something with their free time, to earn money or to have a skill set. And many times they actually have something they want to do. So it may be something to consider, but what we need to think about is like, okay, this particular career choice they want to do, it must not interfere with her primary goal, which is, again, she's a mother and a wife. Now, with that being said, I think in today's era with the economic considerations, that sometimes it is a reality that we need to think about more strongly because cost of living are not only rising, we're finding a lot of the marital issues are also connected to financial discussions. In fact, one of the biggest causes for divorce is marital financial issues. And this is something that some of the ulama mentioned. So to say this is that would we recommend the sisters to do that? We'll say, well, sisters' primary job is to take care of the children, to raise them and raise them well, and to be good wives and homemakers, because this brings more barakah to the community than her earning money. And what she does for her family is transitive, and what she does for her own earnings can be more limited. But if she finds, for example, her children are getting older or she has more free time, there's no harm. In fact, it might be something she wants to consider to do some work from home or online on these kinds of things because it can bring her more money to help her produce, for example, money for her future. What I mean by that, Umrah, or maybe she wants to save some money for Hajj, take care of her parents when they get older. These are challenges that we have today, right? Like I said, the sandwich generation. But I would not recommend that sisters just get a career if they devoted themselves to become mothers and wives and homemakers. Suddenly they leave that and just start doing career because we don't have a shortage, I think, in our today's time of employees, generally speaking, compared to stable households. Which of the two is a real problem in our community? Is a stable household. From my own little limited experience, right, I see that a lot of the community we are working, generally speaking, but then the home was suffering. This is what I'm saying. So I think we need to always put that in order of priority. If it doesn't conflict and the husband is okay with that, because again the time has been dedicated to it, then something to definitely consider. Because I do think that sometimes there are some things that sisters have, like taking care of their parents, that sometimes the brothers don't always realize as well. But I would say the first priority is motherhood and homemaking, and a second various other one. And this discussion that they have to have together, because the ulama mentioned from the conditions of a woman working after the marriage contract has been completed is that she should be primarily a mother and homemaker. And if she wishes to work, she has to be with the agreement of her husband because he's providing for her in exchange for her also taking care of the home, right? But definitely, I think so. In today's time, there needs to be a middle ground, right? Not we tell our sisters all to work careers and forget motherhood, or the opposite. But we're telling them there's no other thing you do. And also, lastly, a lot of times also the sisters who have a lot of free time should also consider seeking Islamic knowledge and providing that as well. For that is also more important because we're suffering also from that as a community and having enough educated sisters to teach. So I'll make it easy, but definitely maybe inshallah looks like this as a second question like the first one. We need to do a separate seminar for these sister questions, inshallah.
تمام إن شاء الله جزاكم الله خيرا. Someone is asking about working as a youth worker for YMCA. That stands for Young Men Christian Association. The job consists of helping or working in facilitating skill development workshops. Is that permissible?
So yeah, so to make a judgment on that one, we would have to go throughout that criteria that we shared earlier to go through all of them to see if it fulfills the line of work in general, helping people with skills or getting jobs or presenting for them something like this, presentation about skill sets. Generally, that line of work is halal. Yes, the YMCA does stand for Young Men Christian or Young Women's Christian Association, but the work and the job itself doesn't involve anything Christianity, right? It started off during I think the Great Depression. The YMCA's became very involved in social services when the Depression hit and people were poor and needy. And yes, it was developed by Christians, but now it became more of a secular organization. So you're not necessarily committed to Christian values or anything like that, right? But the idea is the task itself. The only way we can make that discussion is what we talked about today. So we'll have to go back to our criteria and run through it, and also look at the description at the work itself. Is there anything involved in there that would be haram, for example, especially the fourth one, right? So the origin is that giving skill sets, right? Working in a job like this where you're offering these skills to people who need it, just also is halal. But now the question we're going to make determined are these other elements. Why? What is going on? YMCA? Who are you offering the service to? Anything haram there? Is there anything in the services that you're offering? Are you supposed to encourage, for example, or tell people to take jobs which are questionable Islamically? Very important question, right? So, for example, let's say someone comes with a career option and says, "I would like to become, I don't know, tattoo artist," and as a YMCA skill consultant or counselor, I'm supposed to tell people, yes, you can take that job. These are very important, right? Discussions, right? So you can follow me here. So those considerations will help us figure it out. So because I don't have all that in front of me, and we can say the origin, we can say the general what's prescribed is allowed, but the rest of it we have to look into. So that's why I gave the framework. So inshallah, a person can go in and do that homework themselves, because we have to take, and that's another benefit we take from this. Every case is job is taken case by case. Why? Because it depends on what you're doing, right? So inshallah ta'ala is very important. So once it becomes like clear, then we can say that. Until then, we can just talk in generalities, right? So that's just something to say. But in terms of the YMCA name, right? It's no longer, you're not doing anything haram in terms of Christianity there, because that's not no longer there. That's what their name is. That's not what the task is. And again, I could be wrong, but this is what I understand. Allahu a'lam.
تمام جزاكم الله خيرا. Someone had a question about being a taxi driver. The main job is to send people to the chosen destination. However, if they had a customer who their destination is a haram place, like a club or a bar, does it make only the money made in that trip haram, or the whole job haram?
It's a very good question, right? Scholars, when talk about taxi driver, most of them they say that it's allowed in general, following the first criteria, which is that the job by itself is halal to take people to place A to B. Where the consideration of the haram and halal come is in the fourth consideration, impermissible acts, which are a number of them. One of them, the question asked, taking people to haram places, right? And second consideration, issue of khalwa, right? In difference of opinion, right, among some of the scholars, is khalwa happening like being secluded with the opposite gender alone in the car, or is it exempted? There is difference of opinion among some of us causing that. And another consideration would be taking, when doing this job, like we said, taking people to places which are haram, but also carrying at times things which are haram that you might not know of. Like somebody walks in with a bottle of alcohol or something, and you don't know or you didn't notice. But the main one we're going to just deal with now is the issue of the places. So if somebody does go to a place, or as a taxi driver takes someone to a place with haram, that's haram to do that. And as we know that, so this will make the person is doing a haram mubasharatan, right? Directly. So that is haram. The question now is the whole salary haram, or is it indicative of that one aspect? We go back to the qaida we mentioned, that the minority follows the majority. So that minority you did that one time, because the ujra, that amount you get paid is based on the amal you did. If the amal you did was haram, then the money that time is haram. But now, let's say it happened one-off. Let's say it just happened one time. I didn't plan it. The question we need to ask, are you often doing this? Or is this happening here and there? Because this is where the scholars then discuss, does the whole job become haram? Or does it become haram to the haram you're doing? And Shaykh Muqbil rahimahullah, when he was answering the question about working in a store which sells halal and haram, he said that if someone does this, his money will be haram in accordance to the haram he does. And I think this is a very correct, a nice way of thinking about it, because it depends, the money follows action. So the question would be then, if you did this action knowingly, that the person came to you and said, I need to go to the club, and you took them to the club, that is haram. That's haram money. But if the rest of your job, you don't do that, then the rest of your money is haram. So that means that the person would know that he did something haram. He needs to try to give sadaqah and expiation if this stuff happens. But let's say it keeps happening, or so often now. Now your job becomes haram because now you're no longer filling the condition. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that because sometimes it happens and it's not something you even plan. Some scholars even go to this point to say that if somebody got in the car as a taxi driver and the person told you go somewhere, you don't even know where you're going. You put the address in, right? When you get there, when you got off, and the guy went off, then you found out it was a haram place. Can I take the money or not? Some scholars they discuss this for the scenario. And some say that if there's no way for you to get the person out the car, for example, you can't stop the middle of the road and say out. So what do you do then? So some say if this has happened to you without you knowing, and the aqd happened without knowing, it can still be haram because you didn't know and you were forced to. After you got there, it's too late. But the problem is when we know beforehand, the person can give you address, you know exactly where he's going. So I would highly recommend a taxi driver because of these scenarios, these three issues I mentioned, taking people to haram places, the issue of khalwa, and the place also carrying haram things at times, is why many scholars they're not very advising of this job, unless someone tightens the condition, but very strict. They only, for example, you work certain hours to avoid taking people to haram places. Like I work daytime, not night, because I know nighttime people like to go haram places. I try my best, right, to try to do group trips, not single trips. Right? So these are some of the things. But see, this is one of the challenges that we find. So inshallah ta'ala, the person could understand. But if just to answer the question though, if it happened one time or a minority of times, not the whole salary is haram, only that much is haram. But once it becomes a repeated issue, now you need to question the job because it's happening more and more. And then we said the majority follows the minority, and the majority takes the ruling of the entirety. That's the next one. So if I'm doing it every time now, every week, every other day, I'm taking someone to haram place. I'm sorry now, this work is no longer the halal job that I initially signed up for because I'm taking people to haram places, right? So I'm not make it easy. These are some of the big challenges that we have. That person has to be honest with themselves as well when they're working, that they are, because we mentioned the hadith, أجملوا في طلب. Make beautiful your search. So once you be honest with yourself, Allah will give you something better. Inshallah.
Imam, Jazakumullahu khairan. Another question we have. For the consideration of lifestyle, what if getting the job takes away from your lifestyle more than the job itself? So becoming a doctor, for example, is the example they gave. Getting the actual job and getting through that takes away from the lifestyle more than the actual job itself.
Well, that's the thing. Like these kinds of jobs, like doctors and other highly trained professions, they require for somebody to take a lot of effort. Now, it's true the doctor will be studying hard, but he's working hard now to earn later. Hence, many of the scholars, they understood, and they said that being a doctor is one of the highest professions possible. After the Quran and Sunnah, studying deen is medicine. But if somebody knows this, they have to make that commitment at the beginning that there's going to be some compromise. What I mean by that, you're not going to fall below the halal, right? You're going to just shout out the basics. You're still going to be praying, but your family commitment, your ability to, do extra ibad or go to the masjid as much as you like to might be compromised to study. So it's a trade-off. So the person should put it as a limit. To study to become a doctor, this comes with the challenges. The question we ask, are you doing anything that's beyond the wajib? Falling below the wajibat, the fara'id. You have to pray 5 times a day. You still have tight kinship. You still have to come around to the masjid as much as you can. That's all happening. But maybe you're sacrificing the extra deeds. You're not doing the extra things you used to do. I think at the end of the day, the ulama also say something very helpful to help people know that if you're studying something to help the ummah, which is fard kifaya, a communal responsibility like medicine, inshallah, that person will be rewarded heavily for taking on that load. For someone has to do it. And I think that's the thing that sometimes encourages the people to take on these big tasks, the good niyyah for this. Many of the ulama, they say that that's why Islam encourages people to work in these fields. In fact, some ulama went so far to say that even the Islamic ruler can go to the level of pushing people, and not forcing them, but really incentivizing people take these fields because the ummah needs it. So if someone knows this, they need to bear in mind that, look, you're going to help the ummah later. The big things you have to sacrifice now, but the sacrifice should not lead you to missing salahs. It should not lead you to, for example, cutting off your family. It should not lead you to something that haram. One more thing I want to add to that is that some of the times somebody may tell themselves they want to go into this field, but they find it's not helping them get to what they want. So some of the great imams, they stopped studying medicine because of this. So for example, Imam Nawawi, he mentions rahimahullah in his biography that when he was studying medicine one time, and he was getting really good at it, but he saw how much time was taken from the ilm, he just abandoned medicine. And the reason why is because he wanted to do something bigger for the ummah, which is talab ilm and become an alim. So you could say that trade-offs, it depends on also someone's ability. But we just tell people that when you have to sacrifice now for to gain later, that's actually what we want the young people to remember, that if you want to do something big, it requires effort. But we have to also to warn this youth from, though, many youth don't want to do any work, hard work. They want fast money. This is one of the challenges that they're facing. They don't want to do, say, why should I even work hard? So Halal, make it easy, inshallah.
تمام إن شاء الله. جزاكم الله خيرا. The next question is regarding a builder. If you are a builder working for a company, however, that company has a contract on building a building that is used for haram, like a alcohol or wine distillery or a nightclub or things of that nature.
So this is one of the things that comes as well as one of the questions. Somebody's working as a builder. We said building, or basically building is halal to be a builder by origin. But now you are doing a particular activity, right, which the services are generally allowed. But here now we're doing a contract which is for haram. So if the place that we're building is only used for haram, and I'm the builder and I'm doing the building, now the question comes, is that helping in sin and transgression, or is it not? So the answer here would depend on what is the understanding of helping in sin and transgression. Many of our scholars, they take the view that once you're building something haram to be used for haram, that is considered you're helping in haram. So the builder who's building, is he directly helping someone haram? Someone says just building the wall. No one drinks alcohol from the base of the wall. But some will say, but he's building the infrastructure for that. So one group of scholars, due to that, said it is not allowed. Another group of scholars, how they analyzed it, they said that when you're doing these kinds of jobs, if your job is not directly leading to the haram, you are not directly involved in the haram yourself, means I'm building the building. I'm not helping in someone serving alcohol. So this is very important. The alcohol is being built. It's going to be drunk there by somebody else. But my job is to build the building. The building can be used by the alcohol company who drink alcohol and other things. But I'm not doing that part of it. There's some of them, they say that it can be allowed. The best thing to do now is once you're a builder, you should avoid that contract. But if it's a contract you're doing as part of your general work, then the work is still halal, but that contract you fall into is something which is doubtful, right? Because again, the scholars, they analyzed it and they differed on how to interpret it. But someone should tell themselves then, the job you're doing is still halal. But now the question is, let's say your company only builds distilleries. It only builds these things. You see, now you're going to go in this category violation. You're only providing service for haram companies. But if you're on this side here, then again, going back to our principle, the minority versus the majority. And I think it's one of the challenges that we find, that a lot of the companies that we work for and the tasks that we're expected to do, they may involve at times something haram. And it's not possible for the builder to say, I'm sorry, I can't work in this particular task. So therefore, a person will have to really analyze about what's going on here and how often it's happening, and then make that decision. But also, we need to say, like, some of the conversation revolves around a discussion that I would recommend everyone to go back to, which is our teacher, Al-Fajr, Hafidhullah Ta'ala. He has his fiqh of modern contemporary issues. He has a nice discussion on this topic of ta'awun birr wa taqwa. The helping in sin and transgression. So I highly recommend going back to those lectures, I think tape number 5 and 6, in which he discusses it in greater detail, what is meant by, because you really go into that discussion. Someone says, what if you work for that company? See, that's different. If you're not working for the company, then the conversation I was talking about is where we are. If you work for that company and you're giving these services, then the same thing here. if the services you give are used by many companies, sometimes that company, some company, it's still halal the work because you're contracting out to different companies, right? For example, I am a contractor or a building company. They come to me. If I'm the company guy, and if I have the power to say no, I will say no. But when you work at those companies, you just take everything that comes. So the question is, what is the company's majority clients? If it's many, inshallah, the work is to halal. But if it's like haram ones, the question we need to start thinking about, like we said, solely or mostly used for unlawful purposes over here, right? Original activities are completely lawful or not. So your opportunities are halal, but the service is not being offered to haram here and there. So inshallah, the origin still is halal, but the person has to be careful because the problem is that we have to look at the company and see how many times it's happening and what can he get out of it. Can he have any say to say no to it? And it's very tricky, like I said, because most of the companies that we work for today, and we have, they're not going to be 100% halal, pure, right? And that's why we're not going to tell someone their work is absolutely haram, but at the same time, we're going to tell them to analyze and to view. So that's why the person who works for that company, he must first see, as a building company, halal, I offer services to many clients. I don't do anything haram, but once in a while it may come up. Then I'm going back to this rule, inshallah ta'ala, until this rule becomes the majority or becomes really problematic. Then I'm going to have to reconsider my job. And I think that's the general practice that we should be going through. So once you fulfill the criteria, if the criteria becomes changing or no longer fulfilled, then you would pivot accordingly. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakumullahu khairan. Another question we have is, if you have a business helping other businesses make more money, is it permissible to work with businesses that use Tasweer in their marketing?
So now, if somebody is a business consultant, or let's say here business, you offer client services or businesses or advice, the origin of your business would be halal. But now you are working with another company. So now that company, it becomes the company of your partnership, let's say, or your contract. Are their original activities halal? So let's say they're doing, I don't know, a cleaning company, and they have Tasweer as part of their business. Okay, but Tasweer is not their business. Tasweer is what they use in their business to promote. Okay, the services of that company, what are they doing? They're doing halal cleaning. These clean company business clean, like say, buildings. When I'm offering the services, am I offering a service like advice? Yes. Am I offering them photography and tasweer issues? No, I'm offering the service. So the work is to halal. We are not responsible for what they do of tasweer. And the proof for this is that some people, they forget that when you work with the company, the capacity which you're working in will judge the work to be halal or haram. So example, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Hadith Bukhari, when he used to trade with the Jewish people, he used to trade with them. For example, the last transaction he did on collateral, right, where he bought some flour or some, like this for a price, deferred payment, and he put his shield as a collateral. Now, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is doing business with the Jewish people, and Allah says about them, akalun al-suht, they eat illegal money, right? So what they do is they do things that they use riba. So Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was doing transactions which are halal, despite what they do of haram as part of their general business practice. Is he responsible for what they're doing? No. So it's halal, right? So Allah tells in Surah Ma'idah, generally speaking, at that time, right, there are people akrihim as-suht, they used to eat the haram money, and that's how they were doing things. Okay, so if this is what they were doing, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, did he do anything that involves illegal gain money? No. Is he involved in riba? No. He's just doing a halal trade. So I'm not responsible for what they do in their business. I'm responsible between me and you and their transaction. Another way to explain this is that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam sahabi Ali, there's a narration in Ibn Majah, it's authentic narration. Ali radiallahu ta'ala used to work one contract he did with a Jewish man to work, and his job was to collect some water from the well, and the Jewish man was going to pay him a few dates, right, per like load when he pulls it out. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, Ali anhu, his job was to work halal job with people who are what again? Who generally speaking, they do things in their business which are not authentic halal. Some Jewish people at that time used to work riba, other things. But his contract with them is halal. I'm gonna work for the pull the well, I'm going to get the dates. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam actually, one hadith said he ate the dates, he gave him as well. So the fact that they're akalun and suh, they were eating illegal wealth, or in this scenario, they're doing tasweer. Tasweer is their business that they're doing their business. That's not my business. I'm not supporting that. What I'm doing, I'm giving you advice on how to build businesses. So I'm giving you a service which is halal. But if my service is telling them though how to do tasweer or that kind of stuff, then that's different. See, so if your business is just to tell them, hey, this is how you grow your business. This is how you, for example, do money, how to make flows for money, or this is what you should be doing with clients. That's halal. But if you're offering service with tasweer, now that's different. But if they have tasweer, that's their business, and it's very important we differentiate this. For many times, this is where the confusion comes. Because again, if you understand the examples I gave, that's what the ulama said. This is generally why it's halal, right? So inshallah, it becomes clear to us that if your transactions are halal, the services you're offering the people are halal, and the offers that their general work they're doing is halal, you're not involved in any haram, inshallah. Wallahu a'lam.
Tamam, jazakumullahu khairan. We have a question here. Is attending a mixed university allowed?
So this is one that's a big question, probably bigger than this discussion. The general ruling is premixing in public institutions is haram. The problem that's happening now in the West is that most institutions, as well as work, has premixing. So because of this, I also believe it's one of those, I was thinking about including in this conversation, but due to the limitation time, I didn't. So it requires some discussion. The reason why is that we know it's haram. But the problem, we live in a society where it's everywhere. Does that mean now, is it halal or not? And I don't want to give a blanket answer and say it is or it's not. And if we know the origin is haram, so that's what we're going to stay with. But when or if did anyone say it's allowed with any conditions? And I think the reason why this is important to say this is that if we were to tell people, yes, it's allowed because there's nowhere out, that also doesn't face reality. Many people are going to fall into fitna. So there needs to be a much better response. And the ulama have spoken about it. And I also believe it requires the fatwa of the ulama, personally speaking, because we know the original ruling, and this is based on evidence, haram. The question I think people are asking is, how can I get some of these jobs if they require the free mixing? This is the question I think people are looking to. And I will say, for me personally, I'm a miskeen. I cannot pass fatwa like this. We need to ask Ahlul Ilm, and we need to get a detailed answer about it, because the situation, I think, is this issue that the question is asking, that what do we do when there's no other option? One of the solutions, online education. That's what I promote, because number one, it's saves you from fitna, allows you to work, to study from home or wherever you want. And there are many options available now. So we must exploit the alternative. And number two, if we tell people whole scale, like without looking at the detailed issue, that the origin is haram, and we just tell people, no, go ahead because there's no choice, we're also forgetting that many people are trialed in these environments, so much so they lose their deen, forget their dunya. So we need to also be fair and say, look, we need to not be just saying, let's just go for it. Rather, what we should be saying, inshallah ta'ala, is, since there is alternatives now after COVID of online education, exploit those opportunities, especially in the UK, more so than in North America. For the UK, they have much more online opportunities than we have here in the North America, comparatively, from what I researched before. So we must exploit those opportunities. If schooling is what we're looking for, right? And I think this is the best answer we should be giving now. As for whether or not there's room for change, we need to fatwa from the ulama, and I cannot, me as a miskeen, I cannot give that. So wallahu a'lam.
Tamam, jazakumullahu khairan. One of the questions are, how do we handle underemployment?
So underemployment, one of the challenges I said before is that it's coming from the fact that we're choosing certain careers maybe that are not paying as much. That's part of the problem. But I also highlighted in these papers that I think people should read about, to find out that we also are being as Muslims punished. Not always, but we could be more than we think, being punished by certain sectors of society for being Muslim. And what's happening is that this paper specifically realized, is there a correlation between religiosity and Muslim women employment? And they found there's no connection the way the researchers before thought. It means the women who are more religious were not less working. So that's showing us that at least in America, there seems to be, religiosity doesn't mean you're not gonna be working. But in the environments they're looking at, Canada and the UK, others, underemployment has to do with the fact that we need to figure out certain paths, career paths which are higher paying. We need to become certified, or get those certifications for that particular fields, and we must aim for higher salaries by looking at what we need, but also what's available in the market. I think undereducation is one of the problems, right? As we kind of hinted in the last question, that's one of the problems why we're underemployed. We're not as qualified as others. Part of it being that the schooling system has been pre-mixing other things, which is a legitimate concern that we have right now. Number two, we also find that many times that the jobs we're looking for, which are more family oriented, and this is maybe the case, are not so lucrative. Right? Maybe some of the jobs, for example, part-time education work, or working certain more like family-oriented positions, they're not going to be paying you a lot of money compared to jobs which are more like professional jobs, require more dedication. But the biggest concern, I think, is the qualification. Because even if we said there's a Muslim penalty out there, that there's people who are discriminating, credentials allow us to move markets. And this is the key. You can move to a Muslim country. You can move, work remotely. They can't even see you. And I think also Muslims need to be more qualified than we probably need to be, in order to also be competition from other angles. And what I mean by that is, like, imagine now there's two competitors or candidates for a job, both are highly qualified. But one of them looks more Muslim, as we said, as the wording, the khatab and others are used, right? More, right? Visibly Muslim, right? Based on visibility. So let's say visibly Muslim. Another one isn't. They might be choosing that one, the non-visibly, or the one who's not so Muslim. So how do we overcome that? We need to be more qualified than their perceptions can limit us. Or we find opportunities by making our own opportunities as well, by producing businesses and hiring one another and working together to overcome some of these stereotypes and stigmas. I think it's a complicated issue, right? It's very complicated. But underemployment, the easiest reason for it is lack of credentials. So inshallah ta'ala, Muslims can push themselves, right, to find those credentials that they need, but also to demand a better salary by looking at what's happening in the market. Research and power is also allow us to do that. So this is some of the reasons, but it's a complicated topic. I think it's definitely worthy of someone, inshallah, Allah gives them tawfiq to study it and to help the Muslims to figure out what can we do about this. But the main conversation for today was, if we, inshallah ta'ala, take it seriously, the responsibility of working, we actually go and look for halal work, make dua to Allah. Allah will give us a rizq. Allah already created. Allah will promise the rizq in the heavens, that already decree for us, and that which we do. So inshallah ta'ala, there's good news that we don't have to kill ourselves over that. We already know that be moderate, Allah will take care of it. But the real challenges that we're facing, those that we need to figure out also what are these causes, and some of these papers could help us. Allahu a'lam.
Jazakumullahu khairan. Someone was asking about that principle, where it was derived from, which is the majority taking the ruling of the entirety and the minority taking the ruling of the majority.
So some of the scholars, when they talk about this qaida, they say that ultimately was something like, which example, let's say, is mostly halal, or let's say is mostly pure. Then if something impure were to come to it, then we know Islamically that the impurity is overlooked and mixed with the purity. So we give the example of the hadith, right? Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in the Sunan, he talked about the water. The balagh al-mal qullatayn. If water reaches the level of qullatayn, qullatayn is like, scholars differ what exactly that level is, right? Is it an actual method or level, or is it actually just a discussion of a large amount of water? So whatever view you want to take, you could say it's actually a certain amount of water, and some say it just means a tremendous amount of water. So they say إذا كان الماء قلتين, if water reaches level قلتين, big amount, لم يحمل نجس, it will not hold any najis or khabath. So this hadith, Abdullah ibn Umar, Sunnah Abi Dawud and others, authentic. So the ulama take this hadith that now if you put a couple of drops of urine into a huge pool of water, is the water become najis? No, because majority of the water is pure and it didn't change one of its three awsaf, its color, taste, or scent. So we gave the ruling to the majority despite there being some impurity minority. So that's one of the proofs amongst the many others they use. And the reason why they mentioned is that if someone today has work which is majority halal, for example, a company which is majority halal, right? And then it has, right, something a little bit of haram, right? Then we're not going to give ruling to the small haram because that will be discarding the most halal, right? And this is important when you looked at this issue of judgment. So another proof they bring is also another guy that's similar to that in the wording. So that's one of the proofs they use. Another example we could also think about is when it comes to uh, certainty. If something is known to be correct or halal in certainty, let's say, for example, something's pure or something is halal, and then something haram came to it, we're not going to say that the haram made it haram because the ibrah is given to the asl. And the fara', the secondary thing, has to overcome the asl. So, example, Ibn Qudama, he writes in Muqtasim al-Hajj al-Qasideen, if somebody has halal work or food, and then suddenly the food became questionable due to a particular type of haram or something fell into it, he says that we're going to go with the majority. Why? Because the asl is majority. But when you go back to the hadith I mentioned earlier, you can kind of see already the minority should not be given consideration. But they also say now, come back to this point, the majority. If something is mostly halal and something has a little bit of haram, you have to give weight to the halal because it's mostly the case. Ibn Qudama, he says, if someone's work or is lawful or something was initially lawful, then became questionable due to some haram, we cannot say the whole thing is haram because that would be discarding the majority, which is supposed to be halal. So based on this hadith and others, they got these rulings and they mention many wordings. If you go to Mawsu'a al-Qa'id Fiqhiyya, it brings even more adillah to show it. So the reason why I'm saying this is that today, when we're judging companies, the ulama, they mention this in order to make a judgment on the asl of the nishat, the activities of a company. I'll give you an example. Grocery stores. Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, when he came to the grocery stores, he said, okay, the grocery store, we know it sells what? Food, drink, etc. Small minority of it is pork and alcohol, correct? So now someone says, I'm going to work in the grocery store. Now, most of us will say grocery store, which is mostly halal. No one's going to say it's haram because we all go to the grocery store and we buy stuff. Can I work in the grocery store if I work in a section where there's no haram happening? And the answer is yes, because you're working in a company which is mostly halal, again, giving way to the majority, because that's what most transactions are going to be happening. Most transactions are not going to be based on the haram. So the Shaykh Uthaymeen said, if you're working there and you're going to be offering groceries and you work in a sector which you don't have to do haram yourself, let's say I work in the produce section, then inshallah, right, my work is halal. So the reason why this is very useful is that just like I gave the example of the water, or when it comes to other examples like that, if we don't give consideration to the majority, as the hadith did, then what are we going to be ruling on? Minority, and this is not correct. So inshallah, if someone wants more on that, you can get it from that book where they bring the different madhabs and their adillah, but that's the gist of the idea, that when there's so much of something pure and something little haram, the purity overcomes the halal, and the consideration is given there. Because some people say, shouldn't we just go for halal companies? That's the best. That's why we say its activities are lawful. But if we can't find one whose activities are all lawful, we'll say mostly lawful, knowing that some of the companies, all right, this is again the vast majority of companies, this is the problem, right? The vast widespread affliction of companies, even Muslim companies, sadly, have some activities which are haram. Allahu a'lam.
Tamam, jazakumullahu khairan. Someone is asking, is it okay to name my translation business Amanah Translation, or is it not permissible due to Tazkiyah of one's work?
So Amanah as a name, inshallah, there's nothing wrong with that because the term Amanah is not a tazkiyah in the sense that you're saying to yourself you're doing something, right, that you're not actually hoping to do, because you have to have Amanah anyways when it comes to translations. And the term Amanah itself, as a trust, is something which a Muslim should have at work. So the tazkiyah, then the one that's prohibited, is when the tazkiyah is something which either a person doesn't have that quality, or it's something which in and of itself is a purity, it's a praise in and of itself that is not befitting. And it's also scholars say that it should be avoided, generally speaking. But when it comes to Amanah, that's the command. We're supposed to have Amanah, and as a workers, we have to have Amanah. So generally, that term, inshallah, is permissible. Again, if you want a specific fatwa from the ulama or something, we could look into it. But inshallah ta'ala also is allowed, because scholars will talk about the praise, and there's a conditions for praising oneself. And this is not a praise, this is just a ikhbar, and informing others of what you're actually upon of Amanah, which is good, right? You're supposed to uphold the Amanah, right? The best of people you can hire anyways are those who are strong and trustworthy. So inshallah, there is no harm. Allahu a'lam.
Jazakumullahu khairan. Another question we have is working as a nurse halal, especially if you cannot choose only female patients?
So this is one of the also difficult jobs as well, or questions, because we know in general, if a woman is working as a nurse, if she's working in the women's side, right, of that, what means a maternity ward or something like this is halal, because she's working, sorry, with women only. But the problem is that when you work in a general public setting as a nurse, you're working both with men and women. And number two, the issue of clothing, right? Because they have to wear the scrubs, right? And so some of the scholars, obviously, when they mentioned it, they said, no, this should be avoided because of this, unless a person, as we said, is going to be tweaking their position. So an example would be, if I'm going to work as a general nurse, where I know I'm going to have to wear particular scrubs in front of non-mahram men, which is problematic, and I'm going to be touching, the hands and the whatever, the clients of which are men. This is something which should be avoided. But now someone may say, but then there's a lot of hajj. What are we going to do? We need women in that field, which is true in some regard, but that doesn't mean that we should be pushing people. That we should be telling them is that we need to find an alternative, which is that we need women. Alhamdulillah, most women are doing this, going to women doctors, women nurses, and refusing to have men nurses, because they have the fear of also other inappropriate touching. So the best advice for sisters then is to, if you want to work in a nurse, you work in the maternity ward, where you'll be only working with women, and inshallah, you'll be only dressing whatever dress you have to wear in front of women. So for example, if she goes to work with her abaya or whatever, and when she goes into the ward, she will change it to those scrubs in front of women only. You see, that's a possibility, right? But the problem we have today is, if you say I'm just going to become a regular nurse, you're going to be with touching the men, and everything's a hajj, because sometimes it's just like, they don't want to get a second, they get a male nurse, or not enough for them, or sometimes they're just going to put you, and then you're going to be wearing that clothing. That's the thing, we have to always think about the clothing and the environment. So from all these angles, we need to tweak it to be more Islamic, more halal. And that's one of the things why I gave this criteria, to allow a person to use it to figure out how they can take something which may not be so Islamic and make it more Islamic. Right. So see, that's why we need solutions. We need solutions. For example, it's allowed, but then now, okay, I'm going to work in a hospital, but I'm going to be helping people, but then I'm going to be wearing something not correct or touching people without need. And so you see, and again, for the women's questions, inshallah ta'ala, what we can do is try to do a separate seminar later, right? Because a lot of the questions the sisters are asking, they also require those details. So may Allah give us tawfiq for that.
Ameen. Jazakumullahu khairan. We have a question here by a mother who's asking, what would you advise a parent who has a child that has no enthusiasm and is lazy, and they are getting old, and they do not work or study anything of the deen or the dunya, nor do they want to get married? Would the harsh approach be advised, and kicking them out and things of that nature, or what?
So this is a big issue, because it's as the mother's asking, rightfully so. And I've also noticed that from my experience, there are many young men who are now falling into this trap, especially after COVID, more so, I think so. But even before COVID, where they're not doing anything, they're doing the deen, they're not aspiring for anything, and parents are frustrated with them. The major thing that they're really suffering from, a lot of them, is that they're surrounding themselves in a reality which is not really realistic. Means the parents, alhamdulillah, are taking care of them, they're providing for them. So they're not even in a fear of losing that, in the sense that they're just gonna get the food and drink and stay at home. So because of this, they're in a comfort that they don't realize is coming from someone else's striving. Second problem they also have is bad friend circles and probably bad habits and activities. They're probably playing a lot of video games, watching a lot of shows and movies, and hanging out with people who are similarly like them, who are unemployed or not doing anything. So we know then if you sit with such people, you're going to become like them. And some of the ulama advise not to sit with such people, and are you to sit with people who are aspirers. The third thing, they need mentors. And I think this is the biggest problem. A lot of young men, they don't have a lot of older mentors, brothers or friends or cousins, uncles or imams in their lives. Even if their father is there, sometimes he's busy too. They need people they can get them up and show them the ropes. So I would advise the mother to try to reach out to the local community she has to find people who are older than her son, who can give him the advice in a way that he can understand, and to also understand that he needs to do things for the community and himself first, taking care of himself. And we already talked about the levels of providing. If the mother and father, for example, stop providing for him, who's going to take care of him? This is the first reality. But really, what's coming from the lack of aspiration is this kind of laziness that comes from too much amal, too much hope and feeling of security, which is coming from something which we're not used to. And actually, many studies have also found this. And unfortunately, especially for us, our immigrant children, that they're not carrying on the legacy that our parents they strove for, that they strove so hard for them. So highly recommend getting them that help, the mentorship of someone who's successful that your son can look up to, who's a practicing Muslim in the community, who could take them in the wing and who could talk to them and who could show them. Because a lot of times, if you show them what he's capable of doing and how he can do it, instead of lecturing him, you're walking him through it. Maybe sometimes he has other issues too going on too. Like, for example, he has low self-esteem. He has a lot of self-doubt. It's very true. So many young people say, I'm useless. I can't do anything. He hasn't found his calling yet. So what happens is somebody comes and shows him, look, if I show you something here, a skill, follow it. Inshallah, you get a job like I have. And he does it and he gets it. It's very exciting. But many times what happens is that he thinks in his head, I'm such a fool. I don't know anything. I'm ignorant. I'm bad. I don't care. And a lot of times there is also sometimes even some other like deep down issues, right? In terms of like maybe, I don't know, I'm not saying everybody has mental health issues, but I'm saying something the youth, they need a lot more encouragement and motivation and explanation. So the best thing we have to do, we need that mentorship. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of his practicalities, this is very important now, hadith. Sunnah, imagine others, authentic hadith. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one day, again, scholars are different on the authenticity, some authenticate, like Imam al-Albani, others they weaken it. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one day, a man came to him who was in poverty, and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he came to him and said, I don't have any money, I need help. Prophet said, okay, bring me something from your house. He brought him a cup or a vessel. Prophet went, he sold it and made 2 dinars or 2 dirhams. He took that money, one of them he said, keep it. Another one, go and buy the head of an axe. So the man went, he bought the head of the axe. Nabi Sallallahu took the axe, he took a stick and he connected them and made him a full axe. Then he told the man, go to the forest, chop down some trees and sell it. I don't want to see you for the next 2 weeks. So the man went to work, cutting the trees, selling it in the market, coming back, and he made money. So before, when he came to Prophet Sallallahu, he had nothing. He had no plan. So Prophet Sallallahu showed him, practically showed him. This is very benefit part of the hadith. For those who authenticate the hadith, he practically showed him, took the axe in his hand, put it together, told him what to do, practical advice, career option, practical way. He did it and he made money. And he saved that one for later. So he's able to take care of his family now. One of the problems with our youth is that we need someone to do that for them, because sometimes like he's sitting there, he doesn't even know where to look online, or something that's bothering him, no one knows. So he needs somebody to like to get to the bottom. What's the problem? And and sometimes he doesn't want to tell the mom, he doesn't want to tell dad. Maybe he just, and again, like I said, a lot of things that are facing youth. So inshallah ta'ala, this is more inshallah getting him a mentor and finding someone like that, and also Muslims in our community who are successful have to do this. And I really think making dua for him, but don't give up on him, kick him out of the house. That could make it worse, because we know that he's right now doing nothing harmful, except that he's not helping himself or you. But if you kick him out, then you know he's going to end up in the streets and doing real bad things and criminal activities and things which are or drugs and other things. It's even worse. So it's not good. Rather, we have to continue to do what you're doing. Allah will reward you for this difficulty and struggle you're going through. But I think it's really important as Muslims, we need that practical way of helping the youth and the mentorship that's missing in our communities today. Like I said, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was there for the Sahaba in these angles, where us today, everybody's like, doing his own thing. So nobody helps the youth like practically. Many youth don't even know how to apply for a job, make a resume. It's the truth. And sometimes we tell them, go get a job. He's probably thinking, I don't even know how to make a resume. That's how bad of state I am. And then I'm getting pressured to get a job, and he's getting worse by the day, right? So if people can really step up and try to help him. But also, I think we need to find good company for him and figure out what is going on in terms of how he's thinking. Or why doesn't feel the responsibility to take care of his mom and dad, which is a great shout and honor, right? A great deed and feeling, right? Sometimes it's they don't realize it. I think parents have to also talk to their children about their own lives. I noticed that when parents talk to their kids about their lives, about the difficulties they went through, and how they sacrifice for the child, it really puts a sense of story and sense of purpose for them. A lot of our youth, they don't even know what their family has gone through for them, or they feel like so entitled because they're living without any context. So it's really helpful. Parents also talk, explain, help them realize, right? I need you. That's why a lot of things I couldn't do, or I chose to do for you. Now it's your turn to return the favor. May Allah make it easy for all the mothers in that situation.
I mean, another question that we have: what would you advise parents who have conflicting advice for their children regarding marriage and career paths?
So the parents are conflicting, or parents and children are conflicting.
The parents' advice is conflicting. So
okay.
one time they're advising for marriage, and one time they're advising for a job.
Okay. Yeah, and that's another thing that I think parents have to do a better job at. They need to not send mixed messages and be very honest and very clear. And I'm saying this because I think it's more to do with for the sisters, that some of our parents, they tell the children to study. And then when they study, right, because they listen to the parents and they started studying, then the parents said, okay, stop studying, not to get married. So the parents, the child's confused. Why am I studying if I'm going to get married? And if they get married, they tell them, oh, you should have studied. So what happens, the parents are the ones who are also themselves are not about clarity, and that's not helpful. Number two, the child themselves obviously is going to be doing what is in their best interest, but they need to also remember that if their parents are telling them different things, there has to be a benefit for them as well. So if it's going to be, the advice is going to harm them, let's say, for example, they got married now based on the advice, and now the parents like, oh, you need to study and make money. Say, I'm already married now. It's very difficult for me to do that. Or the opposite, the parents are saying one thing one day, another day. So sometimes what you do is that you need to listen to them, but you also need to start thinking, as you said, looking at our presentation today, finding out yourself what is going to be in your best interest, because your parents can only advise, they cannot force, as we said. So if a parent is saying different things, and the child has to also look at their own maslahah, what they want and what's good for them too, and try to figure out like what are the two will be better for my parents as well. So I think parents, though, sometimes they need to be honest. Some parents, they tell their children to study, but really what they're telling them is to study until this age. At this age, I don't want you to study anymore, you just get married. So sometimes it's like, okay, Phil, what should I study or not? Should I just study knowledge instead? These are very interesting, very clear like issues that are happening. Also, I feel like sometimes the parents don't know, right, themselves what is good for their children 100%. So sometimes what they also need to do is they need to take their advice. They need to take advice of other people in the community, their teachers, the elders, and try to figure out, okay, what is the best piece of advice for me in this scenario that I am? Because the ulama also mentioned when it comes to taking advice, there's a rule that you take the advice from people when they give it to you, but it is not wajib on you to take all the advice given to you. Right? And the reason I'm saying is that if somebody tells you to get married and you think it's not in your best interest in the moment to get married, because you might need to take more time, then you do what's better for you. You're not sinful for saying, I'm sorry, I'm not taking that advice. But imagine your parents are telling you so many different things. If whatever you do, you're following their advice anyways, right? Because they told you one day one thing or another day another thing. But I think the parents have to stop doing that, because it's not good for the children, because they can't predict what they're supposed to do. And I think that parents also don't always say clearly what they mean. So I would highly advise parents be more clear, be more honest, but also be very aware that the child is not gonna be successful if they're getting mixed messages, right? So I'm gonna make it easy for us, but we need to be honest, to be more clear instead of telling them different things, and that also can create that kind of confusion, because whenever there's a choice to do more than one thing, typically people don't do either of them, or maybe they do the least of them. So we're gonna make it easy.
تمام جزاكم الله خيرا. We have another question by a questioner here. The question kind of has two parts. The first part of it is that he has finished school with a career as an automation worker. And one of the companies he has an opportunity at getting an internship in does multiple works, several different things. Majority of them seem normal and halal. However, one of the things is connected to the military defense force in Norway. Now, the majority of the work is for good, he mentions, but one of them is for the military. Does that one part of it outweigh the rest because it is a big factor?
So that's a very good question. This one, obviously, the truth be told, need to be studied in more detail to figure out like to what capacity is that thing that he's doing here, working military, and what is he doing in that military. But the thing is, like in these kinds of things, I would say that generally speaking, that will be better is to get the details of that particular job and to analyze it more in detail before making a judgment. But when you see, as the question said, that if that's the only thing that they're working on, or it happens, like I said, one factor, but it's a big one, steering clear of it is safer. This is general advice. And that's what I would say right now, just because, again, it requires more research. But the best thing is to avoid, if someone is afraid that even though they're mostly doing good, but there's something like this. Because remember, like if you say the services are mostly halal, if the services are mostly halal, but in some angles there's something haram, yes, what is that haram? What is it going to do? Right? Is it like, for example, like something haram in of itself, or is it something haram other than itself? So something to be investigated. So I would say, like, inshallah, maybe the professor can send it to Amanah in more detail. We could, try to send it to our teachers to get some more feedback on that particular job itself, inshallah.
Tamam, inshallah. The second part of his question is that he doesn't have much interest in this career, and he does have interest in being a train driver. However, in order to do that and achieve that, he needs the required level of maths in school. He needs to go back to school to do that. So his question is, should he stick with this career of automation, or should he go back to school again to complete that level of math needed for being a train driver?
So I think this is a question now that the questioner is going to have to decide based on what we've offered today, inshallah, of the four considerations, right? So the aptitude that he has for train driving is definitely stronger than what he has now for automation. And inshallah, both careers in origin are halal. But the question will also now look at the third and the fourth one, the salary. As we said before, that one of the challenges that we're having is that, yeah, there's so many options of things that you might want to do, but maybe you might not do just because the salary or the lifestyle is not conducive for good Islamic life. And I think that's a very big consideration, that people may say, which of the four is stronger? Well, first, number two, of course, it has to be halal. And after that, where is the consideration going to be? Well, I like it, I'm good at it, or the salary. Of course, if you're good at something, you're gonna get a good salary, inshallah, for it, or people are gonna pay you more for it. So I definitely would say to the question that you have to make a good analysis now. How much do train drivers get? What's their lifestyle like? How is automation? How much do they get? How lifestyle like? You might not like automation, but it's kind of easy for you, inshallah. Generally, is train driving more halal than that one or not? These are things you're gonna analyze. But what's happening is that even if you have to go back to school a little bit, as you said, changing careers, there's no harm in that. But what might be a good consideration is that if I change my career to a career that I like in theory, but I don't like the lifestyle, you see, might not be. And that's another thing about what you're good at and what you like is both ease, something easy for you, but also something that is good for your other areas of life. For some people, they take a career because they can do it easily, but also allows them to do what they really want to do, which is have more free time. That's a trade-off they're making, right? So this is also very good to look at that angle. Like, do you really want to drive a train? Yes. Is it going to be better for you in automation in all the different angles? And if the answer is yes, then go for it. Right. But if it's going to be something not so, then you're going to make that decision. That's like a personal decision. Alhamdulillah, we have a criteria, all these 4 elements to analyze, because I can't make the decision for you. He has to make the decision. But if he actually believes that it's better for him, he really likes it, it's better for him with all the angles that he's looking at it for all 4, then going back to learn math or to review math might be a good choice. But in order to make that decision, he needs to sit down and weigh all of them. I go back to what we mentioned here of the steps you're gonna follow, right? Our steps here, and also he's gonna consult with his parents as well, in terms of what do you think I should do, and because he'll get the feedback, do the istishara, ask people around him, okay, look, mom and dad, what do you think? You know, and inshallah ta'ala, he will find his answer. Inshallah.
تمام إن شاء الله. جزاكم الله خيرا. Someone has a very straightforward question. What is the ruling on working in a mobile phone store?
So working in a mobile phone store by itself, if we go back to our criteria, it's halal. Because what is the person's line of work? Selling phones. And someone will say, but what if I sell phones and these, people are gonna do haram stuff with it? Or it has a camera in it. Or it has, so the scholars already answered this fatwa. Selling, and so here's the rule now. Selling and buying any product that can be used for both halal and haram is halal. Any product that can be used for halal or haram is halal. Why? Because as long as there's 2 options available, the origin is, when it comes to things, and bay' is halal. But when does it become haram to sell something? When you have additional information or clear indication the person intending to buy the product is going to do haram. For example, someone came to you and said, I'm going to take the phone and I'm going to shoot a film of haram or something wild, and you're going to say, no, I'm not going to give you the phone now because I don't know what this film is. But are people doing that when they come to the store? No, they come to the store and buying the phone. They come into the store and they're just buying the computer. So the scholars, they say this is permissible because it goes both ways. So the use of that device, awesome. And we go back to our rule. When it comes to the halal and haram, the ulama also mentioned the qaida, إذا اجتمع الحلال والحرام. When halal and haram come together, what is consideration is given? The consideration is given to the halal or the haram, whichever is ghalib, whichever one is majority. So in this case, a product can be easily used both ways, so it's asr fil halal. As for the camera and the Wi-Fi and the other things, that doesn't change the ruling of the origin, unless, of course, like we said, you have details. So a person should know that. Now, what else can be done in a store? Again, that over here, a person will have to analyze. Is there anything else they might be doing in a mobile store that's haram or halal? That's another consideration to take into. Again, I don't know of my mind right now, but let's say there's some other activity he has to do that's not halal, then that will change the ruling. But the origin of the product is both. So over here, if it's used solely or mostly for Allah purposes, or not used, can be. So if it's used equally, it's allowed, inshallah ta'ala. And that makes it easier for us because even ourselves, when we go and buy phones and buy computers and stuff, people are selling it to us and not knowing what our intention is, right? But it's allowed for them to do that. So that's the origin. Likewise, us selling it to them, fil asl, right? But now if someone says, is there anything else in the job that would need to be investigated? Hence over here, you would have to look to see what else would they expect from you at that job. Allahu a'lam.
So if someone is asking, in addition to that question, what about satellite installation? Does that take a similar thing?
So now that one, we know it's not the same as the first one because satellite is used for television, and the television now services are a mix of things which are, of course, is TV. Most of our scholars do not advise and make it prohibited the use of television or the viewing or watching of shows and movies and stuff like this. The television by itself is both ways, right? By itself, because you can use it as a monitor and others. But I'm talking about the shows and the stuff. Satellite is about offering services of shows, right? Or channels. So it's different than a product, it's a service. So when you install the satellite, you're offering a service of a streaming, or what do we call it, the channels. And what are those? Are they mainly halal or haram? That person has to investigate honestly. So we know generally most of the television programming is not permissible stuff, generally speaking. So someone should avoid that. Now, is it possible someone can say, well, what if I'm installing this thing and that? So there is some, again, if someone wants to go deeper and detailed and restricting, that's something someone will look into. But we're saying in origin, you should avoid it. Why? Because if somebody knows that most of the TV shows or channels, they're not good, or there's a high chance of it, it's very doubtful already. Now, if someone will say, but how do we know? That's where the research is. I cannot just tell you right now that every single channel. But what we generally know, a lot of the channels have haram in there and things going on, which is not good. So someone should avoid this, inshallah, and try to work in installing other things, which are more halal, like ACs and whatever else you can install in homes. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakumullahu khairan. Someone has a question. He says, my son wants to become a game designer or computer application designer. I believe a software developer or developer of that nature. Is this line of work allowed? Perhaps he's more specifically towards designing games and matters pertaining to that.
So that's the thing where, generally speaking, games, and digital games is already a discussion amongst the scholars as well, if the line of work is here or here. Because some of the scholars, the way that they analyze and look at the games, they say that if these games as image making, some of that view, and some of the view that the games themselves are not beneficial, they're more harmful, most of the games. So a lot of them are going to be arguing they shouldn't be doing that. But if we were to argue on the other side that it can be allowed, the question is that, okay, what is games are you producing? So because we have to start by first determining what levels is it here or is it here? You see, and then after that, if it's here, then what is this? What kind of games are you making? Games which are car racing games or kids games. So I would say in this kind of discussion, it requires more detail. It requires even some research to take it to our shaykh, right? Because it is one of those areas where there is it's a bit of a gray area. It needs to be researched properly because, like I can tell you, the scholars already differed about the nature of it. So if somebody really is interested, especially the youth, they're really interested in these games and stuff, I would say better for them not to develop the games, knowing that they're not necessarily the most beneficial use of their time, but just do development of other apps that are more beneficial to people. Going back to what we mentioned before, that a job that helps the community more so, has more benefit, it's more rewarding and beneficial than a job which is not. That's one of the considerations of a hirfa, which is sharifa, that it has more benefit to the community and more honorable. So doctors, right, businessmen, etc., farmers, why they consider it so good work? Because they do more for the community. So that's another thing that a person can use. A parent can talk with a child. If you're just producing a game, as fun as that sounds, just you're only making a game. Why don't you make an app to help people in their life and get because sadaqah jariyah for the community and for the people. خير الناس ينفعهم للناس. The best to be those most beneficial to the people. So inshallah, that's another way of looking at it, because it should be totally requires research. This one, and all those gaming areas, entertainment, and that kind of stuff, because of the nature of the work. So I would just say try to steer them towards something better, more beneficial, inshallah. But if the question is still there, inshallah, we can probably take it to those more knowledgeable, inshallah.
Jazakumullahu khairan. We have about 4 or 5 more questions, inshallah. We'll see how many we can fit, perhaps in the next 9 minutes. The next question is, if one sells baking materials and alcohol is part of the ingredients used to preserve the fruits being infused in the cake, does this make the business haram? And then they explain the alcohol. They say it's not the type that's to be drank. It's only suitable for soaking the fruits, after which the alcohol will be filtered off from the fruits before inserting the fruits into the cake.
Yeah, so we spoke about this in our lessons of fiqh of food and drink. And the summary that the ulama, they talk about alcohol used as preservatives. And they mention generally that this use of alcohol is very different, as the question said, than the one that's drunk. So for those reasons, if you find products that have them in them, generally speaking, the scholars see the products that have this kind of alcohol are permissible to consume because they're used as preservatives and they're very minute, minuscule, and they don't have any impact on the taste and the scent or effect, or no ethanol left. But now the question is using that same alcohol, if we can call it alcohol to begin with. So if someone says that, okay, it's not an alcohol that is drunk, it's an alcohol that's used as a preservative, is it an alcohol that we know is haram because ma askara kathiru faqalil haram? And so if it's allowed to be inside the food already because the preservative, that's forgiven due to the minority and no longer it's already mixed by somebody else. But us using it, we must first determine, is it actually an alcohol to which is halal to buy and use? So if the answer is if it is alcohol, means it's possible that thing can make someone drunk. Even if drunk at a large amount, if drunk in a large amount, then it's not allowed to even buy it and use it. But if we can't make that ruling on it because it's actually more of a chemical than it is alcohol, because remember we use the word alcohol, there's a chemical alcohol, then there's a drinking alcohol, the ethanol and the methanol. So I would say the discussion should be, wallahu alam, to first, if we can get the name of the ingredient, and we could find out, right, its use, and if it's actually ethyl alcohol or methanol. And the reason we're saying is that scholars, they differentiate between alcohol that is more of a poison, it's more of a chemical, and the one that is for drinking. In this case, the one we're talking about now, it's more of it just gives the food preservation. It's not actually supposed to be drunk, right? Because if someone drunk is going to kill them, for example, poison them. And the reason why they differed here is that some of the scholars, when they talked about alcohol, they said that khamar, that which comes over the mind and clouds the mind, but it also must be something that people are drinking. Right? We're not talking about things like alcohols which are more ethanol oriented or have poison. And this is the same discussion that came about things like vanilla extract, which is bought, but it's full of alcohol, and the alcohol that's in the vanilla extract that's used is actually ethanol. So that's very different. So if someone wants to see this, you can see the Islamic Majma' Fiqhi Islami Duwali, the International Fiqh Academy, they have a fatwa in their resolution number 225. They say that when you asked about the question, does the source of the ethanol, etc., count? They say the source of ethanol does not have any difference in Sharia ruling, but what's going to be different is obviously whether or not it is used. They say here, sorry, we're going to read quickly. There is no objection within the Sharia to use substances of ethyl alcohol as a processor or a solvent for raw materials used in manufacturing of food products, unless there are halal alternatives and with an amount that does not cause drunkenness. Alas, that's the fatwa they have, and it's a very good fatwa here. So the answer they're saying, if you're using intoxicants, it actually intoxicates, and you're using as a solvent, as the sister or the questioner said, it's going to be to preserve the fruit, and there's no halal alternatives, then you're allowed to use it with an amount that does not cause drunkenness. Right, so that's their answer. So I would say try to first look for alternatives as possible, but if you're going to have to use that small amount, then it's allowed. And that's why vanilla extract, the reason why the scholars ruled against that one, some of them, is because it has 35% alcohol, and that literally is enough to make anyone drunk, right? So it's a big difference. So inshallah, if it's that small amount of solvent, it can be overlooked based on the Majma' Fiqh Duwali's fatwa. But I would also advise if a sister or a questioner has alternative, if available, try to look for that one if possible. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakumullahu khairan. The next question is the sale of perfume which contain alcohol considered haram?
So here the scholars, they differed about perfume, if the actual contents are actually alcohol or not. And we mentioned the fiqh of food and drink lessons as well, that what's more correct is that it's not considered alcohol, inshallah. Scholars differ, but Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen rahmahullah's view and others, it is not alcohol because that ethanol that is in there as a carrier is actually mixed with also methanol and other things to make it a poison. Hence, if you drank it, you would die or go blind. So because of this, the khamar that was used, the terminology khamar is not actually the khamar that me and you are thinking about, which is any food or drink prepared for consumption and intoxicates. They say this is not the type. An example would be like what you find in the gas station, right? The gas station, they have gas. The gas has ethanol at a high amount, but the gas is not prepared to drink. It's for car and fuel, petrol. If you put it in your mouth, you're gonna die because there were chemicals in there to prevent people from drinking it even. So due to this, and the ulama then went into further discussion, is it najis or not? The correct opinion is not najis. And the third discussion was that when you're spraying it, the amount that's coming out, it just carries the scent. So you have a nice scent on your clothes or your body, but the alcohol doesn't actually come on you, right? Because its particles are very minute. So another group of scholars also looked at that and said when you're actually blowing it, in the bottle the alcohol is being like compressed. You're just getting the ether. So that's another way of looking at it. But altogether, without going to the greater detail than this, inshallah ta'ala, is not haram to sell those or to use them, according to the most correct opinion. Because the scholars who ruled it as being haram, what they ruled it on is that they say that this is khamar. And they use the terminology, the khamar, that it has the capacity, salahiyah, it has the capacity of iskar. But the problem we have is that it doesn't actually intoxicate, but actually kills. So it's more of a a poison. So inshallah ta'ala, and on top of the fact that we mentioned that it's no one's drinking it, inshallah, and it's used for other purposes, inshallah, it's allowed. Inshallah ta'ala.
Jazakumullahu khairan. The question is about being a female teacher in a school, in a free mixing school for children who are aged between 13 to 17, and also being a female teacher in a school that are for boys only, with similar age group.
Yeah, so this is one of the ones that I mentioned that inshallah ta'ala in a future lecture we could discuss in more detail the women's work and fields, etc. Because teaching origin is permissible, but where the concern now is that she's working with a very older children, who boys or otherwise, who know the difference of the awrat and nisa, the woman's beauty and adornment. So a woman should not be, generally speaking, teaching such people because it's a fitna for her and them. Now, the problem, though, someone say is that all the schools are free mixing, like most of the schools in the West. Where again the same concern comes: is this exempted or not? And the ulama in general, they discouraged the going those and try to go towards fields or places where if the woman is teaching, she's teaching only young boys, like, or girls very young, if or at a place where there's no free mixing at all. It's very challenging. Again, our teacher Fajr in his fiqh of the Nawazid, he talks about in tape number 6, I think, of this issue, and the fatwa of the ulama. But it's one of those that requires more discussion, detail, and fatwa of the ulama, really, because I think right now we have a challenge is that, and there is discussion. Some of the ulama, they discuss this, that if there's any alternatives or not. But the problem is that when it comes to the women versus the men. So maybe I would just summarize by saying, because I think it requires more time later to go into it and to also collect and ask also fatwa on this. But the question that people ask is that we know that in the Western countries, it's widespread free mixing. Hence, the ulama permit the men who need to earn to go into those environments to provide. But the ulama, many of them do not mention the same fatwa for women because it's not wajib on them to provide. So they don't say then that a woman cannot work at all. They say it's allowed, but she's going to go on those environments. What is pushing her? She needs a haja mashru'a. Right? It has to be haja, a need, which is mashru'a, legislative. And the reason I'm saying this is that the sisters, obviously their primary goal is raising their family, taking care of them, unless they're in a situation now where there's financial burden on her, single motherhood, or her husband cannot have variety enough. We're not going to say people can't work. But the problem that we have is, okay, now we got to that level. She has a haja. But now, does the haja allow her to go in the free mixing space knowing that the women are not like the men? Right? But the men who go in the free mixing, they're also challenged, but the women are the ones who are going to be exposing themselves to men, and many of them are not, Muslim or behaving well, or anything could happen. So those fatwa on that angle are not as many or clear, or like as clear as the other ones. Hence why it requires the discussion and asking the ulama and getting the scenarios and the clarity. Because right now I cannot say that myself even. Do this allowed and just like that, right? Because of this discussion. So it's something that needs to be discussed and researched, inshallah ta'ala, and perhaps, wallahu a'lam, if our host and brother Abu Anas permits, and also the questioners as well, and the listeners, that when it be another time, we can explore these in greater detail and try to offer better guidance than I can offer right now, inshallah. Wallahu a'lam.
خلاص تمام إن شاء الله جزاكم الله خيرا. To here then will be the last question إن شاء الله. جزاك الله خيرا يا أستاذ. We appreciate your time. May Allah Azza wa Jal accept it from all of us and from you and make it heavy on your scale of good deeds.
Ameen, ameen. Jazakumullah khair. Jazakumullah khair for everybody for listening, inshallah ta'ala, and for Abu Anas for hosting. Inshallah ta'ala, until the next one.
جزاكم الله خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.